This video is all about creative strategy in e-commerce, why it's become so important, how you should be thinking about it as a brand, what the ideas are that you need to understand if you want to start leveling up your skills in this area, and eventually how you can move into building your own creative strategy system internally within your brand. But to understand why this has become such a hot topic, and even why the creative strategist role not only exists, but is also one of the highest paying roles in marketing, which, by the way, is amazing considering that the creative strategist role didn't even exist really before a few years ago. We need to firstly understand what the problem is. Now, I'm going to break this down into two parts: the business problem and the meta problem. Now, starting at the business level, and this is where every e-commerce brand is essentially trying to do one thing, which is to make the gap between two particular numbers as big as possible. Those are your customer acquisition cost, CAC for short, or in other words, how much it costs you to gain one new customer, and the lifetime value of a customer, or LTV, and that is how much one customer is worth to you over the amount of time that they have a relationship with your brand. What a brand wants is the lowest possible CAC and the highest possible LTV, and in theory, the wider the gap between those two numbers becomes, the more profit the business is able to generate. It also means that a brand can be more aggressive in terms of how they decide to scale through paid advertising. Now, if you're like the majority of D2C brands these days, then the main way that you acquire new customers for your brand is by using paid social ads like Meta. If this is the case, then really the biggest leverage that you have to reduce your CAC in the CAC to LTV equation is going to be your creative. This means the ads that you're making and then running in your ad account. What they say, who they speak to, and how well they convert really is going to determine what it costs you to acquire a new customer. And that is what creative strategy is all about. And how I like to define it is, what steps do we need to take in order to make ads that generate more revenue and cost the brand less in advertising dollars? So after the business problem is the meta problem. And this can be summarized by understanding how the meta ads platform works in 2026. So if you throw it back a few years and you were advertising through Meta, your competitive edge largely came from how well you could manage the media buying side of things. Things like understanding audience selection and how to structure and run your ad account played a much bigger role in the success of ads and campaigns. Although creative mattered, it wasn't necessarily the thing that decided whether you won or whether you lost. Now, in 2026, in this post-Andromeda era, that's simply no longer the case. The short version is that Meta now reads what's in your ads and uses that to decide who to show those ads to. So what's driving the distribution of ads now to the right people isn't the audience that you've selected, but rather the creative itself and who that creative is aimed at. And what this means in practical terms is pretty significant. If everything you're running looks similar or speaks to the same type of person, then Meta is going to keep showing it to the same group of people. Then your ads stop reaching new audiences. The same people will then see the same creative over and over again, which means pretty quickly, and as a lot of you may have experienced, performance starts to drop off. So the easy way to think about this is that the old advantages around targeting and bidding have largely been automated, and creative is now where the competitive edge is for brands. And that is why having a system behind what you make, who you make it for, and why matters more than it ever has. It's also where creative strategy has become one of the biggest leverage areas for brands in the last couple of years. In this video, the areas that we're going to explore are understanding the customer through research, concepts, messaging, angles and hooks, how to brief creative properly, organization and tracking, testing and reading performance data. And to wrap it up, we'll look at using iteration to improve both the creatives themselves and the performance of their campaigns. So starting with number one, and probably the most important area of creative strategy, or really marketing in general, is understanding your customer. Now, for creative strategy, understanding your customer usually starts with the product that you're selling. You need to have a really clear picture of what this thing is. And the clearer you are on this, the better. What does this product do? What problem does it solve? What makes it genuinely different to everything else in its category? The better you can answer these questions, really, the easier it will be for you to define your potential audience personas. Or in other words, who you are targeting through your ads in order to sell this particular product. And within your audience, there's something else worth understanding. There are going to be very different types of people all buying the same thing, but they'll be arriving at it from completely different places. Here's an example. Say you're selling a weight loss supplement. You could have three completely different people buying the exact same thing. Let's say a 28-year-old woman who's put off losing weight, but now she might have a holiday coming up, and that's the reason why she's finally decided to take action. Then on the other hand, you could have a 45-year-old man, and he might have just had a conversation with his doctor, and that health scare has been the thing that prompted him to finally take action. Then finally, it could be a new mum, and she just now wants to get back to looking how she looked before she was pregnant. So if you think about it, they all want the same result, but where they're coming from is completely different, which means what they need to hear to actually stop and pay attention is going to be different too. Now, part of understanding your customer is also thinking about where they are in their journey when they find you. Do they even know they have a problem? Do they know solutions like yours exist? Have they already been shopping around? That matters because it changes what the ad needs to do. So an ad speaking to someone who doesn't know that they have a problem yet is going to look completely different to one speaking to somebody who's already been shopping around and looking at different options and they're nearly ready to buy. So when you're doing your customer research and building your personas and segments, it isn't just the demographics that you need to look at. You need to really try and understand the situation that your customer is in when they find you and your product. So what's going on in their life? What have they already tried? And what is it about where they're at right now that's making them look for a solution? And really the best way to do this is look at the places that these types of people typically congregate online to talk about these problems. So that could mean your own customer reviews, Amazon or marketplace listings for competitors with similar products, comments under competitor ads or organic posts, Reddit threads where people are talking about the problem that your product helps them with. Basically anywhere you can find people talking honestly about their problems and about experiences that they might have had with similar products. So this part of the research isn't necessarily complicated, but generally speaking, the more volume that you can do here, the better. Because what you're trying to uncover are the insights that will help you define your personas, your segments, and where they sit in terms of awareness, plus the language that they use when they speak about their problems, which, by the way, is often what ends up as copy in the best performing ads. And more insights generally means more and better concepts and angles that you'll be able to build, which leads us on to point 2, concepts, messaging, angles, and hooks. And this is where all of that research really starts to become useful, because once you understand the different types of people in your audience, what's driving each of them, and the language they use, you can start building out concepts. Now, a concept is probably the most important unit in creative strategy, and it's something that most small brand teams don't think clearly enough about. A concept is the combination of 3 things: a persona, an angle, and an offer. The persona is who you are speaking to. The angle is the specific way that you're positioning the product for that person. And the offer is what you're actually selling, or at least how you're presenting it. And it's that combination of those 3 things that makes a concept. And where that person sits in terms of awareness feeds into this too, because the angle that you'd use for someone that has never heard of your product is going to be completely different to the one that you would use for someone that's already been, let's say, looking at solutions and is deciding now between two different options. So going back to the supplement example, if your persona is that 45-year-old man that's just had a health scare from his doctor and is now actively looking for something that can help, the angle you'd build is probably around the health consequences of sitting idle and doing nothing. So the offer might be, let's say, a 30-day supply with a money-back guarantee. Now, that is one concept. If you did the same exercise for the new mum and the woman with the holiday coming up, you've now got three completely different concepts for three completely different personas, all for the same product. Each of them is going to stop a different person in their feed. Now, what most brands do is find one message that works and repeat it in every single ad. The problem with this is that you generally end up speaking to only one potential slice of your audience. And when that message fatigues, which it will, performance will then drop off and there's nothing ready to go in its place. So on top of persona, angle and offer, there's also a fourth element worth understanding, and this is format. The same concept can be expressed in a lot of different ways. So that could be a UGC video, a static image, or a longer form piece of content. And the reason format matters more than a lot of brands realize is that Meta will serve different formats to different people. And generally, some people will never engage with certain types of content. If you only produce one or two formats, you're completely invisible to everyone who doesn't respond to them, and you're alienating yourself against them. So format diversity isn't about creative variety, it directly determines who you can and can't reach. That said, format comes after the concept is already defined. You build the persona, angle and offer first, and then you decide how to express it. Now, once the concept and format are decided, there's one more piece worth understanding before we move into briefing, and that's the hook. So the hook, as probably all of you know, is the first few seconds of the ad. It decides whether someone keeps watching that piece of content or simply scrolls past. And in 2026, with how short attention spans have become, the hook is usually doing a lot more work than any other part of the ad. So a useful way to think about a hook is it's three things all working together. So you got the visual hook, and that's what's on the screen in the first few frames. So the opening shot, the camera movement, the action happening visually that pulls the eye. Then you've got the audio hook, and this is what's being said or heard in the first few seconds.
Every day, Mark Zuckerberg wore the same outfit when growing Facebook to avoid decision fatigue.
So the opening line, the voice, the music, or the sound effects underneath it. And then you've got the copy or the text hook, and this is the text that's overlaid on the ad itself. So the headline, the captions, the words on the screen that pair with what's being said or shown. Now, all three need to align around the same idea. A strong hook in just one of these elements won't be able to carry the other two. There are also different types of hooks that you can use to elicit different emotional responses from the viewer. So for example, one common one is a contrarian hook, where you open by challenging something that your audience believes. Another one is the curiosity gap, where you raise a question or tease an idea that the audience wants an answer to. And that pull is what keeps them watching in order to get the answer or the payoff later in the piece of content. The thing to keep in mind is even within the same concept, you can write 5 or 10 different hooks. And testing across hook variations is one of the fastest ways to find out what's working with your audience. Now, number 3 is something a lot of small brand teams either skip or don't spend nearly enough time on. And it's also usually a big reason why their creative doesn't perform the way that they want it to. And that is the brief. Now, a brief is basically just a document or set of instructions that you give to whoever is making your content. So that could be a UGC creator, influencer, video editor, or a graphic designer. Now, the reason it matters is that without one, what you tend to get is random pieces of creative. So somebody could make something that looks pretty decent or even really good, but within it, the message isn't clear, the hook hasn't been thought through properly, and it doesn't really connect to any of the research that you've done on your customer. And that's how a lot of brands end up producing a large amount of creative without ever really finding anything that properly converts. Now, a brief itself doesn't need to be complicated. It just needs to cover who the ad is speaking to, where they are in terms of awareness, what the concept itself is, what the hook is, what the core message is, which format are we using, and most importantly, what you want the person watching to do by the end. When that's written down before anything gets made, the quality of what comes back goes up significantly. And also, over time, your briefs become a record of everything that you've tested, what's been tried, what's worked, and where the gaps are. Now, that becomes really useful when you're planning the next batch of creative. So now, number 4 is something that also gets overlooked probably more than anything else on this list, and that's organization and tracking. So most small brand teams have no real visibility into what they've already made and tested. They don't really know which angles have been used, which personas they've spoken to, which formats have and haven't been tried. And without that visibility, they end up repeating the same things, missing obvious gaps and making decisions based on gut feel rather than data. Now, the fix for this is actually pretty simple, a spreadsheet. What you want to be tracking for every piece of creative you put out is the concept, the persona, the angle, the offer, the format, the awareness level, when it launched, and how it performed. That becomes your creative map. And once you've got a few months of data in there, it becomes a really powerful and useful tool. You can see exactly which concepts have been tested, what's worked, what hasn't, and where the gaps are. It also makes briefing a lot faster because you can look at what you haven't covered yet and brief towards that, rather than going on instinct. The brands that run a good creative system have this kind of visibility. The ones that don't, essentially, they're working in the dark. Now, number 5 is testing and reading performance data. And the honest reality here is you're not going to nail creative strategy every single time. And you shouldn't expect to. That's the whole point of testing, because testing is how you find out what actually works for your specific brand and your specific audience. And really, there's no shortcut to that. One thing worth saying here is the more time you spend inside the ad account, the better your understanding becomes. You start to see how patterns in your audience responds to different concepts and formats. That kind of intuition only really comes from time in the platform. Now, before we get into how to read your results, there's something worth understanding about what a winner actually looks like in practice. Because the way smaller brands tend to think about this is generally wrong. The expectation is usually that you'll launch an ad, see it work, and then double down on it. And occasionally that does happen, but the reality is that even experienced creative strategists can't reliably predict which ads will win or won't before they launch. Let's say you put 5 solid ads in front of 10 different strategists and ask them each to pick a winner. Most of them would get it wrong. So instead of trying to pick winners up front, the better approach is to clear a quality bar consistently and then run volume above it. If you can produce ads that hit a solid baseline of quality and you produce enough of them, your hit rate takes care of itself. A few will work, most won't. And that's completely normal. Now, that shifts the whole question. Instead of how do I make a winning ad, it becomes how do I produce enough good ads consistently for some of them to win, which is a completely different kind of problem to solve. This becomes a question of systems more than anything else. Now, back to testing, and that's where a lot of brands fall short. Most people will check their ROAS, see a number they're either happy or unhappy with, and pretty much stop there. And the problem with that is ROAS alone doesn't tell you why something worked or why it didn't. Was it the hook that failed to stop people? Was that message wrong for that persona altogether? So the habit to build is reviewing your creative with curiosity rather than just skimming over the top line numbers. If something works, try and understand what about it specifically made it work. When something doesn't work, figure out where it broke down rather than putting it and just moving on. There's also something worth understanding about how to read your results more accurately, because this is something that a lot of people don't understand. Creatives don't operate in a vacuum. What else has an audience seen before they encounter a particular ad has a real effect on how that ad performs. So someone who's already seen a few of your ads is in a completely different position to someone seeing you and your ad for the first time. So when a creative looks like it's performing strongly, it isn't always purely down to what's in that ad. On top of that, the way that Meta attributes conversions can often give you a skewed picture of what's actually working. By default, Meta works on a last click basis, meaning whichever ad someone saw most recently before buying your product gets the credit for that sale. And in practice, that tends to favor ads speaking to warmer, more aware audiences, or more bottom of funnel ads, because those are usually the last thing that someone will see before they convert. So an ad doing the work earlier in the journey often looks like it's underperforming on paper, but take it out of the mix and the ads that look like they're converting will often stop working too. When you're reading results, try to look at performance at either the ad set or campaign level rather than just on the individual ad level, because this is going to give you a much more honest picture of what's actually contributing to performance. And over time, that process of asking why and understanding what's really driving results builds up a picture of your audience that no competitor can replicate, because it's been built through your own testing on your own brand. Now, number 6 is where all of this ties in together, and that's the creative loop. Your customer research informs the concepts you build. Those concepts shape the briefs you write. The briefs drive what gets made. Your tracking system keeps record of it all, and the performance data from what you've made feeds directly back into your research. Then the process starts again. When you run that loop consistently, everything gets sharper. Your creative improves because you're learning from every round of testing. Your understanding of your audience gets stronger, and your tracking means you always know where you've been and where to go next. But there's also a smaller loop running inside the bigger one, and that's the iteration on the winners themselves. When you find a creative that's actually working, the temptation is to leave it alone and then just move on to the next concept. But the better move is to usually take that winner and then produce variants of it. That might mean rewriting the hook while keeping the concept the same. It might mean cutting a shorter version of the video. It may mean taking the same script and then rebuilding it in a completely different format, or even having a different creator read the same angle or script. Most of those variations won't necessarily beat the original, but some of them will scale further than the original ever could on its own. And the ones that don't work still give you useful data about which part of the winner was actually doing the work. Was it the hook? Was it the angle? Was it the format? But you only really find out by changing one variable at a time and then running it again. And there's another reason that iteration matters that often gets missed. Variations have a second purpose, which is to extend the lifespan of winning ads that are starting to fatigue, because every winning ad has a shelf life. The longer it's been in the account, the more people have already seen it. Now, the harder Meta has to work to find fresh audiences. Then eventually performance starts to slip, frequency climbs, and then CPMs, or how much you're paying per impression, creeps up. And the ad that was holding spend 2 weeks ago is now costing more than it should. So iteration in this case is about refreshing the same concept enough to keep it serving to new people. You might change the opening shot, swap out the first 3 seconds, or rebuild the same script with a different voiceover. These small changes that reset how Meta sees the ad without throwing away the parts of it that were working. A lot of brands kill ads too quickly when they start to dip. The better instinct is to ask whether the underlying concept is still strong. And if it is, try a few small variations before completely writing it off. Quite often, a small refresh is enough to buy that ad another few weeks of stable performance. And when you're scaling, every extra week a good ad hold spend is completely meaningful. That iteration loop is where a lot of brands miss the easiest wins available to them. They keep going wide looking for new concepts when the fastest growth is often pushing further into what's already working. And that's really what separates the brands that scale well on paid social from the ones that are constantly starting from scratch. It's rarely about having the biggest budget or most talented creative team. The brands that win are usually the ones running this process deliberately and getting a little better at it every single time round. So that is a high-level overview of the 6 core areas of creative strategy. Understanding the customer, concepts, messaging, angles, the brief, organization and tracking, testing and reading performance data, and the creative loop that ties it all together. In future videos, we're going to expand on each of these areas. So if this was useful, make sure you subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.